Now, of course, there are lots of things that I did as a kid that I don't remember now, many of which I'm glad I don't remember. But that's not by itself going to be a problem for Locke. So long as each person stage has an experience in it that I can remember back to, it won't matter. That'll be enough for me to link back, so to speak, to that earlier person stage and thereby count as being the same self. Notice also that when we talk about being the same person, I want to focus on the literal notion of that phrase rather than the more metaphorical way that we sometimes talk. For example, suppose that I have a friend who has been smoking heavily for a long time, and she finally gives up smoking by means of lots of therapy and strength of will and suffering and pain, finally breaks the habit. A year has gone by. I haven't seen her since for that entire year. Before the year started, she was a smoker. Now the year is done, she's not a smoker at all. I might say to her, you are a changed person. You're not the same person you were before you stopped smoking. Now, we can understand why I'd say that, but for our purposes, I want you to think of that as kind of a metaphorical or hyperbolic way of speaking, in the sense that I don't literally mean that Jenny, my friend, has died and someone else has come to take over her body. This is the same person that was a smoker before, strictly speaking. And notice that, for example, if smoking Jenny that existed a year ago had committed a crime, then even if the police had not been able to find the culprit for another year or two, as long as they've got the same body that did the act, even if that person's not a smoker anymore, they would still say, we found the person that did the crime. We found the person who did this bad thing, and we can prosecute accordingly. So it wouldn't be any response to that to say, no, she's not the same person she was anymore because she stopped smoking. That makes it clear, I think, that when we say you're not the same person now that you've changed a habit or redone your wardrobe or fixed your hair or something, we don't mean that literally, we tend to mean that just metaphorically. I want to talk about not just the literal sense in which we talk about being the same person or not over a period of time. So Locke is able to brush aside a number of seeming objections to his theory by saying, let's make sure we focus on literal uses of the phrase same person as before, as opposed to the more metaphorical or hyperbolic ways of doing so, firstly. And secondly, there are cases that do seem to challenge his position. One famous one is known as the brave officer paradox. Suppose that as a little boy, let's call him LB, a man, when he was a little boy, steals apples from his neighbor's yard. He can't resist the temptation. He climbs over the fence and climbs up the apple tree in his neighbor's backyard, fills up his pockets with apples, and then sneaks back home, doesn't get caught. And then he goes into the military as a young man and becomes very brave, becomes known as a very brave officer. Let's call that BO, brave officer. And let's suppose that the brave officer can remember stealing the apples as a child, so that the little boy is one and the same person as the brave officer according to Locke's memory links theory, because the brave officer either does or with some effort can remember back to the time that he stole those apples. So by Locke's criterion, he's the same person as the little boy. But now suppose that the brave officer grows to become an old general over time. So now the old general, let's call him OG, can remember bravery on the battlefield, but it's been so long and he's lost certain of his memory capacities, he cannot remember stealing apples as a little boy. So now the old general counts as the same person as the brave officer, by Locke's theory, but the old general does not count as the same person as the little boy, according to Locke's theory, because the old general neither does nor can, even if he tries, form memories or produce memories of the experience of stealing apples as a little boy. But notice that this yields a paradoxical conclusion because identity is transitive. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, of course. So that if the old general is the same person as the brave officer, and the brave officer, as we've seen before, is the same person as the little boy, it's going to follow that the old general is the same person as the little boy by transitivity of identity. But we've also seen the conclusion that according to Locke's theory, the old general is not the same person as the little boy because he neither does nor can form memory links with that little boy. So Locke's theory yields a contradiction as applied to the brave officer case. What can we do? Well, we can, I think, refine Locke's criterion so that it says not that being the same person as an earlier person stage is a matter of having memory links that you draw directly to that person stage. That might be sufficient, but it's not necessary for counting as being one and the same person. Rather, we can refine the criterion by saying, well, let P sub n be one and the same person as P1, or P1 can be very long ago, many previous person stages past, just in case Pn does or can remember at least one person experience had by person stage Pn minus 1, say 5 minutes before, or a year before, or 10 years before, which does or can remember an experience had by Pn minus 2, which does or can remember an experience had by Pn minus 3, etc., 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 all the way back to P sub 1. So this is a little bit like, although it's not infinite, a little bit like the idea of a causal regression, so that this person stage remembers back to an experience had by a previous person stage, which remembers back to an experience had by another previous person stage, all the way back to what happened when the man was a little boy stealing apples, so that the old general counts as being the same person as the little boy, not because he can remember directly, but that he can, so to speak, remember indirectly. He remembers an experience had by a person stage who himself remembers an experience had by a person stage who himself remembers an experience had by a person stage, and so on, repeating all the way back to age 6, when, for example, when he stole those apples from the neighbor's backyard. So that if that's right, we've got a refinement of Locke's criterion in such ways to resolve the brave officer paradox.